Imagine two people working hard towards financial freedom. The first one earns $250,000 a year. That means a big salary package, a corner office, and the title they had spent countless years working toward. With that, he pays taxes, mortgage on a fancy house, car payments, and many other secret liabilities that he hardly notices. The second person earns $60,000 a year, much lower than the first person, has earned around that for the past decade. He owns a small rental property that nets $800 a month. He has a dividend portfolio built over 9 years of consistent investing that now generates roughly $400 a month. He has no consumer debt, but a 6-month emergency fund and a monthly budget plan. On the first of every month, before he opens a single bill, money moves automatically into accounts that are building his future. He has built this system with discipline and relentless patience. So, among these individuals, which person do you think is financially free? If your answer is the second person, you're correct. But the bigger question is, are you the second person? Modern society generally pictures the first person as the free one because they look fancier than the disciplined one. The herd mentality of people never understand that fancy doesn't always mean wealthy. No matter what the herd believes, you need to plan your financial life with logic, strategy, and relentless discipline. Because the one with zero financial literacy loses to the one with control, no matter how big their salary is. This is the idea that Tony Robbins has built the financial dimension of his work around. It is the idea that separates the people who reach financial freedom from the people who spend their whole lives chasing an income number that keeps moving just out of reach. Financial freedom is not a salary or a net worth target. Financial freedom is a state of control. Control over where your money goes, how it works, and what it builds. The path to that state is not a bigger paycheck. It is a system. And systems are what this audiobook is about. Tony Robbins spent years interviewing the greatest financial minds in the world: Ray Dalio, John Bogle, Warren Buffett, Paul Tudor Jones, among dozens of others, and distilled their collective wisdom into a framework for ordinary people. The central thesis of that framework is this: the game of money is winnable, not just by the lucky, brilliant, or the one born with a silver spoon, but by anyone who understands the rules, builds the right system, and has the discipline to let it run. We're now heading to the rules, and you are about to see that the game, once you understand it, is far more winnable than you have been led to believe. Here is a question that deserves a direct and honest answer. If more money were the solution to financial stress, why are so many high earners financially stressed? Why do professional athletes, who earn in 1 year what most people will never see in a lifetime, go broke within 5 years of retirement at rates that stagger the imagination? A study by Sports Illustrated found that roughly 60% of NBA players face serious financial difficulty within 5 years of leaving the league. NFL players fare even worse. These are not unintelligent people. They are not lazy. They earned extraordinary sums of money by the most demanding and competitive standards imaginable. And then the money was gone. The answer is not income. The answer is always, without exception, systems. The athlete who earned $50 million but has nothing left did not fail to earn enough. They failed to build the infrastructure, the allocation system, the investment system, the protection system that would have taken the income and converted it into lasting wealth. The income arrived in waves. Without a system to capture it and direct it, it simply flowed through and out, like water through cupped hands. This is not a phenomenon limited to professional athletes. It is the universal experience of anyone whose spending automatically expands to match their earning, which, as we have discussed throughout this series, is the default behavior of the human brain in the absence of a deliberate system. The person earning $30,000 spends $30,000. The person earning $300,000 spends $300,000. The income number changes. the gap between earnings and wealth accumulation stays exactly the same, because the gap is not closed by earning more. It is closed by controlling the relationship between what comes in and what gets allocated, invested, and protected before the rest is spent. Tony Robbins frames this with characteristic directness. He says the secret to wealth is simple: never spend more than you make and invest the difference. 5 words that contain the entire strategy. Invest the difference. Not save the difference. Not put the difference somewhere safe. Invest it. Put it to work. Make it generate more. Because savings that sit idle are being eroded by inflation, and the only way to build the kind of financial momentum that ultimately produces freedom is to ensure that every dollar you do not spend is immediately deployed into something that creates more dollars. The system does not exist to deprive you. It exists to ensure that the investment happens before the spending decision can redirect that dollar toward consumption. The emotional dimension of this is worth acknowledging, because Robbins, more than almost any other financial thinker, understands that money is never purely a mathematical problem. Money is psychology. It is identity. It is fear, desire, security, status, love, and freedom, all tangled together in a knot that no spreadsheet fully captures. The person who earns more and saves nothing is not mathematically ignorant in most cases. They are psychologically driven by the need to feel successful through the signals of consumption, by the fear that abundance is temporary and must be enjoyed immediately, by the belief, buried deep and largely unexamined, that they are not the kind of person who accumulates wealth, that wealth is for other people, that their job is to earn and spend until they cannot earn anymore. Until that belief system is directly confronted and replaced, no income increase will produce a different outcome. The system runs on psychology as much as mathematics. Fix the psychology, and the mathematics follows. Tony Robbins built his entire career on a framework of human motivation, the idea that all human behavior, including all financial behavior, is driven by 6 core psychological needs. Understanding these needs does not just explain why people make the financial decisions they make. It provides the map for changing those decisions at the root rather than the surface. The first need is certainty, the need for safety, stability, predictability, and comfort. In financial life, this need drives emergency fund building, insurance purchasing, conservative investment choices, and the hoarding of cash that feels safe even when it is losing purchasing power. The person who keeps $50,000 in a checking account, earning nothing, who refuses to invest despite having more than adequate reserves, is being driven by the need for certainty in a way that is costing them a fortune in foregone returns. Certainty is not wrong, it is essential. But when it dominates all other needs, it produces financial paralysis, the inability to take the calculated, informed risks that wealth building requires. The second need is variety, the need for novelty, challenge, stimulation, and change. In financial life, this need drives impulse spending, the constant upgrading of possessions, the thrill of speculative investments, the inability to stay the course with a boring but effective long-term strategy. The person who chases the hot investment, who cannot maintain the same index fund allocation for 5 years without feeling the pull towards something new and exciting, is being driven by the need for variety in ways that cost them compounding returns and introduce unnecessary risk. Variety is not wrong either. It is what makes life rich. But in an investment portfolio, variety that is not strategic is just distraction wearing a yield. The third need is significance, the need to feel important, special, unique, and valued. This is the need most directly responsible for status-driven spending. The luxury car, the designer wardrobe, the prestigious address, the first-class upgrade. Significant spending is the most emotionally loaded category in personal finance because it is so directly tied to identity. The person who drives a car they cannot genuinely afford is not making a financial decision. They are making an identity statement. They are purchasing, at great cost, a feeling of significance that their current financial position does not yet produce organically. Robbins is direct about this. Until you find ways to meet the need for significance that do not require expensive consumption, your financial life will always be undermined by purchases that feel necessary and are, in fact, identity management in disguise. The fourth need is love and connection, the need for intimacy, relationships, and belonging. In financial life, this manifests as the social spending we explored in an earlier audiobook. The expenses driven by the desire to maintain relationships, to be a generous friend, to show up for the people you love in ways the culture has defined as requiring money. It also drives financial decisions made to please a partner, to keep family peace, or to avoid the vulnerability of discussing money honestly with the people closest to you. Financial conversations between partners are among the most avoided in American households, and the avoidance is almost never about math. It is about the emotional load that money carries in intimate relationships, the power dynamics, the different relationship with risk, the different definitions of security and freedom that partners bring from their own histories. The fifth need is growth, the need to learn, expand, develop, and become more. This is the need that Jim Rohn built his entire philosophy around. In financial terms, growth is the force that drives self-investment, skill development, and the continuous expansion of earning capacity. It is also what makes the long game of wealth building psychologically sustainable, the ability to find meaning and momentum in the process of financial development, not just in the destination. The sixth need is contribution, the need to give, to serve, to make a difference beyond oneself. This is the need that, in Robbins's view, is most directly connected to the deepest level of fulfillment, and its financial dimension is profound. People who give, who allocate a portion of their resources to causes and people beyond themselves, report consistently higher levels of life satisfaction and, counterintuitively, tend to build wealth more effectively than those who do not. The psychology of generosity, of operating from abundance rather than scarcity, of believing that there is enough, and that sharing does not diminish, but expands. This psychology produces financial behaviors that compound in positive ways. The tithe, the philanthropic commitment, the habit of giving before the giving feels comfortable, these are not just moral practices, they are psychological reframings of one's relationship with money that have measurable effects on financial well-being. Understanding which of these needs is driving your financial decisions at any given moment, for any given purchase, investment, or avoidance, is the beginning of real financial self-knowledge. And real financial self-knowledge is the foundation upon which every effective financial system must be built. Robbins's practical framework for translating the philosophy of control into daily financial mechanics centers on what he calls the money master system, a structured allocation approach that ensures every dollar of income is directed toward a specific purpose before it can be redirected by impulse, habit, or psychological need. This is not a budget in the conventional sense. A budget tracks what you have spent. An allocation system determines what you will do before you do it. One is reactive, the other is designed. The foundation of any allocation system is the separation of income into distinct, purposeful streams, what Robbins calls buckets, and what other financial thinkers have called envelopes, accounts, or funds. The specific labels matter less than the principle. Money designated for a specific purpose, held separately from money available for other purposes, and treated as inviolable within its category. When the investment bucket is funded, that money is not available for spending. When the security bucket is funded, that money is not available for investment risk. The separation is both practical and psychological. It removes the temptation to reallocate and makes the right behavior the automatic behavior. The first and most important bucket is what Robbins calls the freedom fund, the investment account, the bucket that is building the future income stream that will one day replace your labor income. This bucket is funded first, before the bills, before the discretionary spending, before anything else. The percentage varies by circumstance. 10% is a starting point, but the mathematics of financial independence favor 20, 30, or more as income and discipline allow. But the principle is non-negotiable. Pay the Freedom Fund first. Automate the transfer so it happens on the day your income arrives. Treat it as an obligation, as binding as your rent, because it is more binding than your rent. Your landlord can find another tenant. Your future self has no alternative source of funding. The second bucket is the security fund, the emergency reserve, the insurance against the unexpected events that derail financial plans in the absence of preparation. This is not an investment account. It is not earning aggressive returns. It is earning what a high-yield savings account will pay, and that is sufficient because its purpose is not growth but availability. Fully funded, this account transforms the financial life. It converts crises into inconveniences. It removes the emergency debt spiral that forces people to borrow at high interest rates to cover unexpected expenses, then spend months or years paying off the debt while the next unexpected expense is already building on the horizon. The third bucket is what Robbins calls the dream bucket, the account designated for the experiences, purchases, and goals that make life meaningful and motivating. The vacation you genuinely want to take, the home renovation that would genuinely improve daily life, the experience you have been deferring indefinitely because spending feels irresponsible. The dream bucket is the psychological key that makes the entire allocation system sustainable. Without it, the system feels like pure sacrifice, a relentless deferral of enjoyment in favor of a future that never quite arrives. With it, the system becomes a vehicle for conscious, guilt-free enjoyment of the present, alongside deliberate building of the future. You are not depriving yourself. You are choosing your enjoyment intentionally, funding it in advance, and experiencing it without the financial anxiety that accompanies spending outside a plan. The fourth bucket is the giving account, a designated allocation for contribution and generosity, however modest its initial size. Robbins is emphatic about this element, and the psychology behind his emphasis is worth understanding. The person who gives, even in small amounts, from a place of genuine intention, is practicing the psychology of abundance. They are signaling to themselves, through action, which is the only signal the brain believes, that they have enough to share. That orientation shifts the entire relationship with money, from scarcity and anxiety to sufficiency and agency. It is not magic, it is psychology, and its effects on financial decision-making are consistently positive. The specific percentages allocated to each bucket will evolve over time and should be adjusted to reflect current circumstances, income level, and proximity to specific goals. What does not change is the sequence. Freedom Fund first, Security Fund until fully funded. Dream bucket as a committed, non-negotiable percentage of income, not a residual from whatever is left over. Giving account as a practice, not a when I can afford it aspiration. The system is the discipline made automatic, and automatic discipline is the only kind that persists through the distractions, pressures, and competing demands of a real life. One of the most practically useful frameworks in Robbins's financial work is his taxonomy of financial freedom, a set of defined levels that replace the vague, unmeasurable goal of being rich with a concrete, sequential progression that can be planned for, tracked, and ultimately reached. Most people pursue financial freedom as an abstraction. They want to feel financially free, but they cannot define what that means in numbers, in income streams, in specific conditions that would need to be met. Goals that cannot be defined cannot be achieved. They can only be approximated, indefinitely, in a pursuit that never arrives because its destination was never clearly specified. The first level Robbins describes is financial security. This is not a dramatic threshold. It means that your most essential expenses, housing, food, utilities, transportation, basic insurance, are covered indefinitely by your investment income. Not all your expenses, just the foundation. For most people, this is a more achievable near-term target than full financial independence, and reaching it produces a genuine and significant shift in psychological freedom. The person who knows that their essential needs are covered no matter what, regardless of job loss, regardless of market conditions, regardless of unexpected disruption, lives in a fundamentally different emotional reality than the person who is one paycheck away from not being able to cover their rent. Financial security is the first real taste of freedom, and it is within reach for most people within a decade of deliberate saving and investing. The second level is financial vitality, the point at which investment income covers not just essential needs, but the lifestyle elements that genuinely matter to you. Your clothing budget, your entertainment, your dining, the specific pleasures that make your daily life feel full rather than merely functional. Financial vitality means your lifestyle does not depend on your labor, it depends on your assets. The distinction between those two foundations is the distinction between a life that requires your continued performance and a life that continues regardless. The third level is financial independence, the complete replacement of your working income by investment income. Every dollar you currently earn from your labor, replaced by a dollar earned by your capital. This is the level most people mean when they say financial freedom, and it is the level that the 4% rule we have referenced in previous audiobooks is designed to define and quantify. Financial independence is not the end of work. Most people who reach it continue working because work provides meaning, structure, and engagement that goes beyond income. But it is the end of mandatory work, the end of trading time for money because you have no alternative, the beginning of a life in which every day's activities are chosen, not required. The fourth level is financial freedom, a standard of living above your current one, funded entirely by investment income. Not just replacing your current lifestyle, but funding the life you have always wanted to live. The travel that is currently a luxury, the home you have been deferring, the experiences you have told yourself you will have someday. Financial freedom is someday made now, funded by the system you built, running without your active labor. The fifth level, the one Robbins calls absolute financial freedom, is the condition in which you can do anything, go anywhere, give anything, without any financial constraint, indefinitely. This level is not achievable by most people, and Robbins is honest about that. It is included not as a requirement, but as a direction of travel, a reminder that the journey toward financial freedom has no ceiling, that each level reached opens the next, and that the compounding of wealth, once initiated and sustained, moves in a direction that most people starting the journey cannot fully envision from the beginning. The value of this framework is not in the specific level you are currently targeting. It is in the replacement of a vague dream with a concrete progression. You are not trying to get rich. You are currently at level 1, working toward financial security. That target is specific. It has a number. It can be calculated, planned for, and reached. And reaching it changes everything, not just financially, but psychologically. The person who has passed through level 1 into level 2 does not look at money the same way they did before. They have evidence from their own life that the system works, that the accumulation is real, that the freedom, which previously felt theoretical, is becoming tangible. One of the most powerful concepts Robbins extracted from his interviews with elite investors is what he calls the asymmetric risk-reward bet, the discipline of only taking risks where the potential upside substantially outweighs the potential downside, and where the downside is known, limited, and survivable before the bet is placed. This principle sounds obvious when stated plainly. Who would knowingly take a bet where the downside was larger than the upside? The answer, in practice, is almost everyone, because most people do not consciously analyze the asymmetry of the financial risks they take. They do not ask, what is the maximum I can lose here? What is the realistic upside? And does the ratio between those two numbers justify the risk? They feel confident based on recent performance. They follow the crowd. They take the advice of someone who sounds authoritative, and they invest in a hot stock, a speculative real estate deal, a business venture with rosy projections and no honest stress testing, without having clearly defined the downside scenario or determined whether it is survivable. The discipline that elite investors share across wildly different strategies, asset classes, and investment philosophies is a near-obsessive focus on downside before upside. Paul Tudor Jones, one of the most successful macro traders in history, has a rule he has stated publicly and repeatedly: do not risk more than $1 to make $1. His trades are structured so that the potential loss on any position is a fraction of the potential gain. He is wrong frequently. He accepts that. But when he is wrong, the loss is small and survivable. When he is right, the gain is large and compounding. Over thousands of trades across decades, the asymmetry compounds into an extraordinary record. For the ordinary investor, this principle translates into several concrete disciplines. Position sizing, never allocating so large a percentage of your portfolio to any single investment that its failure would be catastrophic to your overall financial plan. Stop-loss thinking, knowing in advance, before you enter any investment, at what point you will exit if the thesis proves wrong, rather than holding and hoping as a loss deepens. Stress testing, running the honest worst-case scenario on any major financial decision before you make it, and asking whether you can survive that scenario with your essential financial life intact. And the separation of speculation from foundation, keeping the speculative high-risk portion of your portfolio clearly demarcated from the foundational allocation that is your long-term wealth engine, so that speculative losses do not contaminate the compounding of your core holdings. The asymmetric bet principle also applies to decisions beyond investment portfolios. The decision to take on a large mortgage is an asymmetric bet. The downside of overpaying for a home that declines in value while carrying an unmanageable payment can be catastrophic, while the upside of owning a home that appreciates modestly is significant but not life-changing. Analyzing it as a bet, honestly, before signing rather than after, is the discipline that separates people who build wealth through real estate from people who are destroyed by it. The decision to start a business is an asymmetric bet, one whose risk profile changes dramatically depending on how much capital is at risk, whether the business requires leaving employment income, and how long the runway is before the venture needs to be profitable. The discipline of asymmetric thinking, applied consistently to every significant financial decision, is not pessimism. It is the structured optimism of someone who wants to stay in the game long enough to win it. Robbins, drawing on the consensus of the investors he interviewed for money, Master the Game, arrives at a conclusion that contradicts most of what the financial media and the active investment industry would have you believe. The single most important determinant of your long-term investment returns is not which stocks you pick, not which funds you choose, not which hot sector you identify before the crowd. It is your asset allocation, the fundamental division of your capital across different asset classes and economic environments. Studies consistently show that asset allocation explains the vast majority of portfolio performance variation over time, with some research attributing over 90% of long-term return differences to allocation decisions, rather than security selection. And yet, the financial media dedicates almost none of its attention to allocation, which is boring and infrequently changed, and are almost entirely predictively useless for the ordinary investor. The core allocation framework that emerges from Robbins's synthesis of elite investor thinking contains 4 categories, each serving a distinct purpose in the overall portfolio construction. Growth assets, primarily equities and real estate, are the engine of long-term wealth accumulation. They carry the most volatility, the greatest risk of short-term loss, and the highest expected long-term return. They are the part of the portfolio that builds the fortune over decades, and they require the psychological tolerance to watch them decline significantly during cycle downturns without selling. Safe havens, government bonds, particularly long-duration treasuries, gold, and cash, are the portfolio's shock absorbers. They perform well when growth assets perform poorly in deflationary recessions and risk-off environments, and their presence in the portfolio reduces overall volatility in ways that make the portfolio more psychologically survivable during crises. Inflation hedges, real assets, commodities, tips, real estate protect the portfolio's purchasing power in inflationary environments where both stocks and conventional bonds can struggle simultaneously. And income generators, dividend equities, real estate investment trusts, corporate bonds provide the consistent cash flow that funds current income needs without requiring the liquidation of growth assets. The specific percentages across these four categories should reflect your individual timeline, income needs, risk tolerance, and the current phase of the economic cycle, a point where Dalio's framework, which we covered in the previous audiobook, intersects powerfully with Robbins's allocation thinking. A young investor with decades of runway and no near-term income needs from the portfolio can skew heavily toward growth assets and accept the volatility that comes with that concentration. An investor needing to draw income from the portfolio within a decade needs a fundamentally different balance: more income generation, more safe haven allocation, less growth concentration. The allocation is not static. It evolves as circumstances evolve. What is static is the discipline of making it deliberately, reviewing it regularly, and rebalancing it systematically. Selling what has grown to become too large a share of the portfolio and buying what has become underrepresented, thereby enforcing the buy low, sell high discipline that virtually everyone endorses in theory and almost no one maintains in practice. Rebalancing deserves special emphasis because it is one of the most mechanically simple and psychologically difficult practices in investing. Rebalancing requires you to sell the assets that are performing well, which feels counterintuitive and psychologically uncomfortable, and buy the assets that are performing poorly, which feels even more counterintuitive and even more uncomfortable. And yet the discipline of rebalancing is one of the few genuinely evidence-based methods for adding return to a portfolio without adding risk, because it systematically forces the buy low, sell high behavior that investors endorse as a principle and abandon in practice under the pressure of market conditions and emotional responses. Everything we have talked about in this audiobook, the allocation system, the buckets, the levels of freedom, the asymmetric risk framework, all of it points toward a single practice that is simultaneously the simplest and the most demanding in personal finance. The practice of daily, deliberate, active control over the relationship between your money and your life. Control is not a state you achieve once and maintain effortlessly. It is a practice. It requires attention. It requires periodic review and adjustment. It requires the willingness to look at the numbers honestly and regularly, rather than avoiding them in the hope that the system is running adequately on its own. It requires the discipline to revisit your allocation when the market has moved it out of balance, to review your buckets when income changes, to reassess your target level of financial freedom as your life and values evolve. None of this is arduous. A serious financial review conducted quarterly, an hour or two of genuine attention, is sufficient for most people to maintain a clear picture and make the adjustments that keep the system aligned with the plan. But it must happen consistently. The financial life left to run on autopilot without periodic conscious oversight is not a controlled system. It is a drift, and drift is always in the direction of entropy. Robbins makes a point in his financial work that deserves its own moment of emphasis. He says that the quality of your life is directly proportional to the quality of the questions you ask. In financial terms, the wrong question, "How do I make more money?" leads to strategies that are income-focused but control-deficient. The right questions lead somewhere entirely different. Where is my money going? And does its destination reflect my actual values? What percentage of my income is currently building my freedom? And is that percentage sufficient to reach the level I am targeting in the timeline I have in mind? What are the specific risks that could derail my plan? And am I adequately protected against them? What would need to be true for me to feel genuinely in control of my financial life? And what is the gap between that condition and where I am today? These questions are powerful not because they have easy answers, but because they are honest, because they direct attention toward the actual variables: allocation, system design, risk management, goal clarity, rather than the fantasy variable of income that the culture endlessly promotes as the solution to financial problems that income alone has never solved and never will. The final piece of the control framework is what Robbins calls the money mastery mindset, the belief held with genuine conviction rather than forced optimism that you are the kind of person who manages money well. Not because you were born that way, not because it comes naturally, but because you have made the decision to become that person, to build the knowledge and the systems, and to measure yourself not against some impossible ideal of financial perfection, but against your own prior self. Are you more in control today than you were last year? Is your allocation more deliberate? Is your system more automated? Is your understanding of the forces affecting your financial life more sophisticated? Progress, not perfection. Direction, not arrival. Control over the process, which is the only thing ever fully within your power. Not control over the outcomes, which are influenced by forces beyond any individual. This is the Robbins framework in its essence. It is practical and it is psychological in equal measure. It is actionable today, with whatever you currently have, and it produces results that are directly proportional to the consistency with which it is applied. Now, I want to close this audiobook with the observation that started it. Two people, similar lives, dramatically different financial realities, not because of income, because of control. Control is a choice. It is not a circumstance. It is not something that happens to you when your income finally reaches the right number, or your debts finally clear, or the market finally cooperates. It is something you decide, deliberately and specifically, to exercise over your financial life. Tony Robbins has worked with people at every economic level, people earning minimum wage and people managing nine-figure fortunes. And his consistent observation is that the emotional experience of financial freedom is not correlated with income level. It is correlated with the sense of control. The person who knows exactly where every dollar goes, who has a system that is building their future automatically, who understands the forces acting on their financial life, and has positioned themselves to navigate those forces, that person experiences a quality of financial peace that the high earner without a system never reaches, regardless of how large the paycheck grows. You now have the framework, the bucket system for allocation, the 5 levels as a concrete progression to plan and track, the asymmetric risk discipline to protect what you build, the core 4 for portfolio construction across economic environments, the 6 human needs as the psychological map beneath every financial decision you make. These are not theoretical tools. They are practical instruments that produce measurable results when applied consistently over time. The only remaining question is the one Robbins asks at the end of every financial conversation he has ever had. What are you going to do today with what you have just learned? Because knowledge without action is just entertainment. And you did not listen to 30 minutes of this to be entertained. You listened to change something. So go change it. Build the system. Fund the buckets. Define your level. Take control. The day you choose control is the day everything changes.